Hi guys. Tonight we settle into the endless sweep of a frozen North American plain. You can almost feel the sting of the wind on your cheeks, sharp as a knife, while your boots crunch through drifts that seem to swallow your legs whole. Every breath you pull in is so cold it feels like glass shards dancing in your throat. And as you stand there, surrounded by this brutal expanse of white and grey, you can't help but wonder, how did anyone manage to sleep here without simply turning into a human icicle by dawn? Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this night, not without some serious tricks up your sleeve. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're tuning in from, so drop your location and your local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Your eyes adjust to the dim horizon where the snow meets the sky, the whole landscape muffled and hushed under its blanket. There is no traffic hum, no glow of cities, only the rasp of wind dragging itself across the flat plain. A line of smoke curls upward in the distance, defying the elements, and you find yourself drawn toward it. Each step is heavier than the last, your breath already frosting your lashes, but still you move toward that faint promise of warmth. You imagine the people who lived here centuries ago, people who knew the cold intimately, yet still managed to build homes that turned this frozen wilderness into something survivable. The snow presses against your boots, creaking like old wood with every stride, and your ears ache from the icy wind. In your mind you trace the history. Entire nations of Native Americans who lived through winters harsher than what you're enduring in this little stroll. One fact often overlooked is how ingenious their shelters were. Not just basic tents, but carefully engineered systems of hide, wood, and fire, tested by generations who couldn't afford failure. The mainstream historians point out that buffalo hides, sewn together in thick layers, were an essential barrier against the wind, more effective than the flimsy canvas Europeans later tried to use. It's not just a detail. It was life or death. You pause, squinting at the faint smoke ahead, and think about a more curious piece of trivia. Some tribes actually smeared the outer hides with mud or clay when storms were fierce, creating a crust that froze solid and acted like natural plaster. It's quirky, almost counterintuitive, adding wet material in sub-zero weather, but the hardened shell turned into insulation, not unlike a primitive igloo wall. This kind of adaptation reminds you that ingenuity wasn't a luxury out here. It was the only way forward. As you keep walking, the air seems to thin, or maybe it's just your chest tightening from the effort. The wind keeps asking the same question: how do you last a night in this? Scholars still puzzle over whether such shelters alone were truly warm enough without the constant aid of communal fires. Some argue the tents were so drafty that people relied heavily on sheer numbers, while others insist the design itself, angled walls, tight seams, venting flaps, was surprisingly efficient. The truth may lie somewhere in between, an imperfect balance of architecture and shared endurance. You let your imagination slip further, picturing the way your own body would crave warmth now if you had to spend the night. You'd shiver until exhaustion set in, teeth clacking like a percussion line, and eventually your muscles would give out. That's the reality of exposure. Your body can't win against nature without clever tools. And it's here, in this vast openness, that you realize how extraordinary it was for native peoples to not just endure but to thrive, to raise children, to hold ceremonies, to laugh and dream, while the wind outside clawed at their shelters. The smoke trail looms larger now, clearer, thicker, a sign of life against all odds. You picture a circle of tents gathered, their pointed tops rising from the snow like stubborn reeds in a frozen lake. Each one a beacon of survival, each one filled with stories you can almost hear if you close your eyes. Imagine stepping closer, your frozen boots crunching softly, the muffled bark of a dog, the distant cry of a baby swaddled in fur. The outside world is merciless, but inside those hide walls, there is light, heat, and a cocoon of human resilience. For a moment, you just stand there, your own breath drifting out in clouds, and you think about how the first lesson of surviving the night is simply to move toward the fire. Always toward the fire. The tents ahead promise more answers, but for now, you hold on to the thought that clever hands, clever hearts, and an unbreakable will have turned this impossible plain into a place where people lay down at night, closed their eyes, and actually found rest. You step closer now, boots sinking into the drifted snow as the wind whistles around your ears. The trail of smoke thickens, and soon the outline of a small village appears, teepees clustered in a circle like guardians against the howling plain. Each structure stands defiant, tall, and purposeful, its hide covering drawn snug against wooden poles that pierce upward into the sky. You feel a sense of invitation, as if the circle itself says, "Come inside, traveler. You don't belong out there." Villages on the winter plains weren't scattered at random. They were often built in a circle, with openings carefully arranged so that the harsh prevailing winds couldn't blow straight through. Mainstream historians have pointed out that this circular planning wasn't just spiritual, it was practical. The design let families shelter each other, their teepees bracing the storm as one body rather than individual vulnerable shelters. And as you trudge into that circle, you notice how the snow itself has drifted high against the outer walls, forming a natural buffer that makes the inner world just a little less cruel. A curious little detail comes to mind. In some winter encampments, people even let snow pile deliberately against the lower edges of the hides. Instead of constantly shoveling it away, they understood that snow could act like a quilted blanket. The drifts became walls in themselves, muffling the roar of the wind outside. It's a quirky trick, using the very enemy that freezes you as a shield to keep you alive. And you can almost hear an elder chuckling softly, telling a child that the snow isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's a friend. Yet scholars continue to debate how much of this setup was intentional and how much was simply the luck of weather. Did native builders design their settlements to harness drifting snow, or did they merely adapt as conditions forced them? There are arguments on both sides. Some archaeologists insist the layouts show deliberate engineering, while others suggest the evidence is too patchy to prove intent. You stand in the middle of the circle and feel that unresolved question like a whisper on the wind. Planning or improvisation? The scene around you grows clearer. Dogs skitter between tents, leaving tracks that lace across the snow. Children's laughter drifts on the cold air, muffled by the fur they wear. From a distance, it's easy to romanticize, but if you step inside those walls with your modern lungs, you'd feel the sharp edge of survival pressing constantly at your back. No one here could afford to let their guard down entirely. The tents were close together not just for warmth, but for safety. At night, wolves might prowl, enemy raiders might test the camp, and the circle itself, enclosing the people like clasped hands, became both shield and symbol. You notice how each teepee has its entrance turned slightly away from the wind, never facing directly into the storm. You picture families ducking in, brushing off snow, stomping their moccasins before slipping inside. And you realize that even the smallest detail, direction, placement, order, was part of the survival game. Nothing here was casual. Your imagination keeps filling in the gaps. You see women tightening the cords that lash the hides, checking for gaps where drafts might sneak through. Men carry wood, shoulders straining under frozen logs cut from far-off river groves. And all the while, smoke continues to rise, the lifeblood of the camp. Inside every lodge, a fire glows like a heartbeat. Together, those little fires create a constellation of warmth against the night. Step by step, you wander through the encampment. You hear low voices, smell roasted meat mingling with smoke, and feel the way the cold weakens as the walls close in around you. This circle is no accident. It is architecture, born of necessity, born of memory, passed down from countless winters before. You almost envy the certainty of these people, who knew exactly where to pitch a home when the world outside was trying to kill them. For a moment, you look up. The poles of each lodge pierce the sky like skeletal fingers, and snowflakes spiral down between them. You realize that here, in this circle, You're not just safe from the storm, you're also inside a story, one that stretches back centuries. You are walking among people who turn nothing but hides, wood, and willpower into survival. The circle holds you, and for tonight, you belong. You stoop at the flap of one of the lodges, brushing off snow clinging to your shoulders, and slip inside. At once, the world changes. The scream of the wind vanishes into a dull hush, and the cold slackens, as if it can't quite find you here. Instead, you are greeted by a darkness that feels alive, a womb-like space stitched from hides and warmed by firelight. Your eyes take a moment to adjust to the dim glow at the center, flames licking upward, smoke curling lazily through the vent above. The air smells of wood smoke and tanned leather, faintly sharp with resin from the pine that burns. You feel it cling to your hair, to your clothes, the way all who lived here would carry that scent everywhere. There's a softness underfoot too. Rush mats or furs spread across the frozen ground keep you from touching bare earth. You let yourself sink down, feeling how the hides absorb sound, how the layers dull the roar of the outside world into something distant and almost manageable. Mainstream accounts describe this central fire as the heart of every lodge, a constant presence. It wasn't just about cooking, it was survival. The fire warmed, yes, but it also controlled moisture, drying hides and keeping bedding usable through long months of frost. Archaeologists have found layers of charred earth at old campsites, evidence of fires that burned continually for weeks or months. Without that central flame, the lodge would collapse into damp cold, unlivable. There's a more curious little observation that creeps into your mind. Early European visitors sometimes complained that the smoke inside these lodges made their eyes water so badly they could hardly breathe. And yet the families living here didn't seem bothered. Some scholars suspect they simply grew accustomed, their lungs toughened by years of breathing wood smoke. Others suggest clever placement of smoke holes, adjusted with each gust of wind, vented better than outsiders realized. Either way, you picture yourself squinting through a haze while the people around you laugh at your watery eyes. It's a quirky detail you suffer. They thrive. And still there's disagreement. Anthropologists continue to argue over just how effective these smoke holes were in regulating air. Were they marvels of design, carefully oriented to prevailing winds, or were they little more than constant nuisances, letting in drafts as much as they vented smoke? The evidence is frustratingly elusive. You tilt your head back, staring at the faint shaft of daylight where the smoke drifts upward, and feel the weight of that unanswered question pressing on your chest along with the haze. Yet even with the sting in your eyes, you can't deny the coziness of this space. Around you, families cluster close. Children curl up under blankets of fur, their soft breathing mingling with the crackle of the flames. You hear the shuffle of a woman adjusting hides at the entrance, tugging them tighter against a new gust outside. A man pokes the fire, sending sparks into the dim rafters, while the air warms enough for you to unclench your shoulders. The cold is still here, but softened, muted, kept at bay by a fragile balance of fire and fur. Your senses take over. The hiss of sap as a log burns, the rustle of skins overhead, the low murmur of voices exchanging words you can't quite catch. You realize that for the people who lived this life, the lodge wasn't just a shelter, it was a cocoon where the outside world couldn't reach. In the middle of endless blizzards, inside this dim circle of light, life felt possible. And maybe that's the secret, you think, as your gaze drifts into the fire. Survival here wasn't about defeating winter. It was about bending the season to your will, creating little worlds where you could close your eyes, breathe through the smoke, and actually sleep. You curl deeper into the furs, eyelids heavy, and realize this lodge, with its darkness, its warmth, and its eternal fire, makes the impossible feel almost comfortable. The longer you sit inside the lodge, the more your eyes adjust, and the glow of the flames sharpens the details around you. You notice the walls' thick layers of buffalo hide stitched tightly together and stretched over poles, heavy enough that the wind outside rattles but doesn't break through. The hides ripple faintly when a stronger gust presses against them, but mostly they stand firm, like the walls of a fortress built from flesh and fiber instead of stone. Mainstream historians often remind us that buffalo hides were the lifeblood of plains peoples. They were clothing, food, tools, and here they were insulation. Each winter, entire communities worked tirelessly to prepare new hides, scraping and softening them until they could be sewn into immense coverings. A single teepee might require as many as 14 buffalo skins, stitched with sinew so tight that the seams themselves acted like barriers to the cold. The result wasn't perfect, but it trapped warmth the way a down parka does today. You lean closer, fingertips brushing the inside of the wall. The hide feels stiff, cool at first, but you realize it is thick, far thicker than anything you're used to in modern tents. The texture is rough where it hasn't been smoothed, but solid. And you think of a quirky little tidbit recorded in old journals. In the deepest winters, some families doubled their coverings, draping extra hides over the outside like giant blankets. Visitors claimed the lodges looked bulky and lopsided, but those doubled walls created a thermal cocoon, even if it made the structures harder to move later. You imagine the lodges waddling across the plains like giant buffalo themselves when it was time to migrate. Still, scholars debate whether these buffalo hide coverings were as draft-proof as oral histories suggest. Some researchers argue that smoke-blackened hides stiffened and cracked, leaving gaps where icy air crept in. Others counter that skilled women constantly maintained them, replacing panels, patching holes, and tightening cords so the lodges stayed resilient. The question lingers: were these tents warm havens by design, or did they demand constant vigilance to keep the cold out? The fire flickers, and you watch how its light dances across the seams. The shadows emphasize just how carefully each piece is joined, an artistry as much as a necessity. You picture women sewing by lamplight, sinew thread pulled tight with practiced hands, children dozing beside them as the work continued late into the night. This wasn't decoration. It was survival stitched into every line. The soundscape inside deepens. The wind still drums faintly on the outside hides, a muffled percussion that never quite stops. But within the layered walls, the sound feels distant, like a storm you've locked out. You realize that every layer of hide isn't just a physical barrier, it's psychological armor. It lets families lie down at night with at least a little sense of safety. Without it, you'd spend the whole night flinching at every icy gust, never sleeping at all. You lean back, wrapped in furs, and trace the thought further. Imagine stepping outside into a snow-swept plain at midnight. The wind claws, the stars blaze cold above, and your body screams to retreat. Now imagine slipping back inside, pressing the flap shut, and feeling the thick hide close around you like a protective hand. That contrast death inches away, warmth within reach, is the essence of this life. And so you understand. Buffalo hides weren't just fabric stretched over poles. They were the line between life and oblivion, as vital as breath itself. Each time the wind rattles the walls, you hear them answer back, steady and defiant. And as you drift closer to sleep, the hides hum with their own message. We hold, we endure, we keep the night outside where it belongs. You shift slightly, sinking deeper into the lodge, and notice something subtle beneath you. The bedding isn't flat on the earth, it rises a little, as if the floor itself has grown a soft mound. Your fingers brush the edge, and you realize the sleeping platforms are lifted above the frozen ground. In a world where every ounce of heat mattered, this small detail made the difference between shivering all night and actually resting. Mainstream historians often point out that many plains and woodland tribes built bedding frames from willow or other flexible branches, lashed together to create low cots. On these, families piled furs, grasses, or woven mats, keeping their bodies from lying directly on icy soil. Cold seeps up relentlessly from the ground, leaching warmth faster than any draft from above, and these raised beds were simple yet ingenious defenses. If you've ever gone camping without a sleeping pad, you know that feeling. The cold ground doesn't just chill you, it steals from you. There's an odd little tidbit about how people sometimes lined their platforms with fresh-cut cedar or pine boughs, not only for cushioning but for scent. Imagine drifting to sleep wrapped in fur, your nose filled with the crisp tang of evergreen. Some accounts even mention that the smell was considered protective, almost spiritual, warding off illness and bad dreams. A curious crossover between practicality and belief. You don't just want warmth, you want comfort for the spirit too. And yet scholars still argue about how universal these raised beds were. Were they standard across winter lodges, or luxuries reserved for those with enough resources? Some anthropologists suggest only certain tribes consistently built them, while others relied more on thick layers of hides laid directly on earth. The truth is murky, and the archaeological traces, bits of wood, patches of matting, don't always survive the centuries. So you sit here, wondering if you're perched on a common bed of the time, or on something a little rarer. The feel of it is convincing, though. You shift your weight, and the woven frame flexes slightly, creaking like an old rocking chair. The firelight flickers across the platform, catching the outlines of furs layered thick. You can almost imagine a family curling up together here. Children tucked between parents, a grandmother muttering softly, everyone packed close not just for warmth, but for reassurance. Above them, the smoke spirals lazily. Beneath them, the cold waits, unable to breach the simple magic of willow rods and layered hides. Your senses keep pulling you deeper. The fur beneath your hand is dense and soft, maybe wolf or bear, still carrying the faint musk of animal life. The air is warm enough that you can relax your jaw, stop clenching against the chill. You listen to the fire's low crackle, feel the rise of heat drifting upward, and recognize how cleverly all the parts work together. The hides above, the bedding below, and you suspended between, cocooned from the ice. It's easy to forget how fragile that balance is. If the bedding rots from damp, if the fire goes out, if the hides tear, the cold will return in a heartbeat. But for now, here inside this winter lodge, the raised platform feels like a small throne of survival. It elevates you not just above the ground, but above the constant fear of freezing. And as you ease yourself back, staring into the firelight, you realize the lesson hidden in these wooden frames. Sometimes the simplest lift, just a handspan above the ground, is what keeps you alive through the longest, darkest nights. You lean back on that raised platform, pulling the nearest covering across your chest, and feel the heavy weight of fur settle around you. It's not a blanket in the modern sense. It's a quilt of pelts stitched together, each piece carrying the warmth of an animal that once roamed these same plains. Bison, deer, elk, even fox, layer upon layer, trapping air the way modern sleeping bags do, only heavier, more primal. The sensation is immediate. The cold withdraws, chased from your skin, and you sink into a cocoon thick enough to muffle the outside world. Historians point out that winter bedding in native lodges was a complex art, not just a heap of hides. Women often sewed fur into patchwork blankets, their stitches as deliberate as those used to make the lodge itself. These coverings were prized possessions, sometimes handed down through families, and they became as central to survival as the fire in the hearth. When explorers first described them, they marveled at the sheer volume, piles of fur so dense that a person could vanish beneath, warm enough to endure nights when frost crept even into the marrow of the bones. But there's also a quirky little footnote here. Some tribes didn't just use fur, they layered in feathers. Goose down and duck feathers were stuffed into covers, making them softer and lighter than heavy hides. Imagine lying beneath a patchwork of downy quilts, the feathers rustling faintly as you shift. It sounds luxurious, almost decadent, and yet it was born not from indulgence but from resourcefulness. Every scrap had a purpose. Nothing was wasted. Scholars remain divided on how common these feather-filled coverings were. Some argue that only certain woodland groups with access to waterfowl could produce them regularly. Others claim trade networks carried such bedding far across the continent, meaning even a plains tippy might hold a quilt heavy with down. The records are ambiguous, the evidence fragmentary. So you're left to wonder, tucked under this imagined quilt, are you resting beneath an everyday comfort, or under the rare spoils of a particularly well-prepared family? Your senses wander as you imagine the feel. The fur closest to your skin is soft, warmed by your body almost instantly. Beneath that, heavier pelts buffalo, perhaps pressed down like a weighted blanket, reassuring in their gravity. You inhale the faint scent of smoke embedded in every fiber, a perfume of survival that no amount of scrubbing could erase. Outside, the wind lashes the lodge, but here beneath your coverings, the world feels distant, powerless. It strikes you, too, that these quilts weren't just practical, they were intimate. A family's story was literally stitched into them. Hunts remembered, animals honored, scraps reused from generations past. When you pulled one over yourself, you weren't just wrapping in warmth, you were wrapping in memory. The hides whispered of the plains, of rivers crossed, of hunts completed. They were history you could sleep beneath. As the fire crackles lower, you draw the covers tighter, listening to the muffled world around you, children turning in their sleep, a baby sighing softly, someone stoking embers with a careful hand. The fur absorbs the sounds, the feather lining dulls them further, and soon you're drifting in a silence as thick as the quilts themselves. And that's the real marvel, you realize. These coverings weren't simply about keeping death away. They created a world soft enough, warm enough, to let dreams arrive. They gave families the chance not just to survive winter nights, but to actually sleep, to rest deeply enough that they could rise in the morning and face another day on the unforgiving plains. The fire in the center crackles, sending a last spray of sparks upward, and you realize how precarious this warmth truly is. Without it, every fur, every hide, every feather loses its power. Heat is the lifeline, and keeping that lifeline alive through the long hours of night isn't something left to chance. You picture the rhythm of winter nights in the lodge. Someone always awake, someone always tending, because the fire cannot be trusted to watch itself. Mainstream historians often describe this as a shared responsibility within families or bands. Nighttime fire duty rotated, sometimes informally, sometimes with a set order. One person would wake every couple of hours to feed the flames, stir the embers, and ensure the smoke hole stayed clear enough to vent. It wasn't glamorous work, it meant rising from warm furs, blinking against smoke, fumbling for logs with fingers stiff from cold. But it kept the rest of the household safe. A fire that died overnight could mean frostbitten faces by dawn, or worse, bodies too stiff to rise again. There's an odd, almost endearing detail you recall from some frontier accounts. Children, eager to prove their usefulness, sometimes begged for the chance to tend the fire. Elders would allow it, under watchful eyes, teaching them how to poke embers just so, how to place logs so they caught without smoking everyone awake. You can imagine a child grinning proudly in the glow of the flames, whispering to themselves that they were keeping the whole family alive. A quirky, almost heartwarming reminder that survival wasn't just duty, it was also a way of learning responsibility from the smallest age. Yet historians still wrangle with a simple but nagging question. How effective were these constant shifts? Did fires really burn hot enough, long enough, to sustain warmth through the coldest nights? Some argue that the hides and bedding alone carried much of the load, with the fire serving more for cooking and comfort. Others insist that without vigilant tending, frost would creep in relentlessly. The debate continues, smouldering like the embers themselves, unresolved but endlessly fascinating. You let yourself imagine one of those shifts. You stir in your bedding, your breath fogging in the dim air. Someone rises beside you, maybe a father, maybe an aunt, and pads quietly to the fire. The sound of logs shifting is soft but reassuring. Sparks flare, shadows leap across the lodge walls, and warmth pushes back against the chill seeping from the earth. You relax again, knowing someone else is watching. The watchfulness itself becomes part of the lullaby. The fire has its own personality here. It hisses when damp wood meets heat. It roars when a log catches properly. It sighs into embers when left too long alone. You can almost hear it complain when ignored, or purr when fed. And like every living thing, it needs caretakers. The rhythm of tending the poke, the shift, the small exhale of smoke becomes the background music of winter nights. You lie back under your furs and let the warmth creep into your bones. The flames, though modest, give the illusion of safety, and the knowledge that someone is always rising, always feeding the fire, lets you drift towards sleep without the weight of worry. Out here, on a plane that could kill you with a single lapse, that trust is worth more than any quilt or covering. And so you learn that survival in the lodge wasn't silent endurance. It was teamwork, vigilance, and the quiet hum of duty shared between generations. Each log tossed onto the flames was a promise whispered in the dark. We will keep you warm until morning. The fire glows steadily, but you notice another trick at play. Near the edge of the lodge, someone has slipped smooth stones close to the flames. They lie there quietly, heating in silence, gathering energy as if they're storing the day's sun. A little later, one is lifted carefully with wooden tongs and tucked beneath bedding, hidden under layers of hide. At first you think it's nothing, but then you realize these stones are miniature suns, placed close to sleeping bodies to radiate heat through the long dark hours. Historians have pointed out how widespread this practice was among indigenous groups who endured bitter winters. Stones, especially river rocks rounded and hardened by water, could withstand intense heat without cracking. Once warmed, they became steady radiators, glowing invisibly beneath hides, warming feet, keeping frostbite at bay. This wasn't just clever, it was survival distilled to its simplest form. You didn't need iron stoves or coal furnaces. You needed fire, stone, and patience. And there's a delightful, almost playful tidbit tied to these glowing rocks. Some families wrapped them in cloth or bark before slipping them into bedding. Children would sometimes treat them like pets, snuggling against their stone dogs or fire babies, laughing as the warmth seeped through the wrappings. Imagine drifting to sleep with a heated rock tucked at your toes, primitive, yes, but in its own way, not so different from a modern hot water bottle. Still, archaeologists puzzle over just how common this trick was. The absence of written records leaves room for debate. Did every winter lodge rely on heated stones, or was it a practice only when fuel was abundant enough to spare? Some scholars argue that wood scarcity might have limited it, while others believe the sheer necessity of warmth made it a near-universal tactic. The arguments swirl like smoke, never quite settling. You watch in your imagination as the rocks are placed, one at the base of a bed, another near a child's cradle, another under a grandmother's mat. The warmth spreads slowly but surely, seeping into fur, softening stiff joints, easing muscles clenched against the cold. The glow is invisible, yet its presence is undeniable, a comfort that lingers long after the flames burn low. The sensory detail is vivid, the faint crackle as a hot stone touches damp fabric, the soft hiss of steam rising, the earthy smell released when stone meets heat. You can almost feel the contrast. Icy air on your face, steady warmth at your feet. It's a rhythm of hot and cold that balances strangely well, coaxing your body toward rest. And in that moment, you realize how resourceful these families were. Nothing was wasted, not even the stones scattered across riverbanks. Everything around them, the earth, the animals, the air, was pressed into service, turned into a partner in survival. What feels like improvisation is actually deep knowledge, honed through centuries of trial and memory. You settle yourself as if the stones were beneath your own bedding now, radiating heat up through your body. The wind outside rattles the lodge, the fire sighs low, and yet the warmth lingers, secret and steady. It is enough to let you relax, enough to let eyelids droop, and you can almost hear a quiet voice from the past reminding you, when the night is long, even the stones themselves can be convinced to keep you company. The fire flickers lower, stones radiate their stored heat, and yet another layer of protection is working outside. You picture the snow itself, piled high against the base of the lodge, like a white blanket draped by nature's own hand. At first it seems absurd. Snow is the enemy, the biting edge of winter. But here, it becomes an ally. Packed tightly, the drifts press against the hides and seal the base, cutting off drafts and muffling the constant howl of the wind. Historians often note that many native communities didn't rush to shovel snow away from their lodges. Instead, they allowed it to bank naturally, sometimes even encouraging it. The science is simple. Snow, when packed, holds trapped air that acts as insulation. It's the same principle that makes igloos surprisingly warm inside, even though they're built from ice. By winter's deepest nights, the base of a tipi could look half buried, and yet those drifts were not a danger, they were a wall of protection. One quirky little detail comes from oral traditions describing how children would sometimes burrow into those snowbanks during the day, carving little tunnels and caves for play. Parents might scold them for letting in too much cold, but at the same time, they knew the snow itself wasn't a threat if respected. In fact, the muffled quiet inside such burrows was oddly comforting, like being inside a secret den. You imagine a child sneaking back in, cheeks red, hair dusted with frost, carrying that same muffled silence back into the lodge, as if it were treasure. But scholars still disagree on how intentional this use of snow was. Did families really plan their lodges to harness snowdrifts, or did they simply adapt to what winter handed them? Some argue the encampments were sited in places where drifting was predictable behind hills, near riverbanks, while others believe the snowbanks were more accidental than engineered. The debate lingers, just as the snow itself lingers long after storms have passed. Inside the lodge, you feel the difference. The wind rattles above, but at your feet the air is still. The packed snow has become a barricade, forcing drafts to climb higher before slipping in. The sound changes too. The storm's roar outside is muted into a low hum, like distant ocean waves rather than immediate assault. It's strange, almost soothing, to know the same snow that can bury you alive is also what lets you rest. You let your senses lean into it. The muffled quiet, the way your breath seems steadier, the strange comfort of knowing walls are thickened by nature itself. Snow has turned from enemy to blanket, from killer to caretaker. You close your eyes and think of how resourceful the people here were, how they refused to see only danger in their world. Instead, they found allies in the most unlikely places, allies that would keep them alive when the night stretched endlessly on. And so, as the wind keens above and the fire sighs low, you feel the snow pressing against the lodge like a gentle hand. Outside, it is fierce and merciless. But here, wrapped in hides and blanketed by snow, you find the quiet possibility of sleep. The night grows deeper, and though the fire smoulders and the hides hold strong, the real warmth comes from something more intimate. You glance around the lodge and notice how closely everyone lies together. Children pressed between parents, elders curled beside grandchildren, dogs tucked in at the edges, bodies forming a patchwork of warmth as effective as any fur quilt. Out here, heat is shared. Survival is a group project. Historians remind us that communal sleeping wasn't just convenience, it was necessity. A single body loses heat quickly, but several pressed together create a small climate of their own. Families slept in tight clusters, breathing in unison, their warmth mingling and circulating under heavy hides. This arrangement echoes across cultures, from Roman soldiers huddling under one cloak to Arctic hunters sharing snow shelters, and in every case, it works. Body heat was the cheapest, most reliable fuel available. There's a quirky little tidbit passed down in oral stories. Sometimes children would be tucked between two adults not only for comfort but as living insulation. Parents joked that the little ones were like hot stones, radiating warmth both ways. In the morning, when everyone stirred, laughter often broke out at how hair stuck in wild directions from so much closeness. You imagine the scene: groggy smiles, a grandmother patting a grandchild's tangled head, everyone amused that warmth could be funny too. And yet scholars still argue over how widespread this practice was in winter lodges. Some accounts describe entire extended families, 3 generations deep, all pressed into one lodge. Others suggest that larger bands split into smaller households for privacy, even if it meant less shared warmth. The evidence isn't neat, leaving room for speculation. Was communal huddling universal or situational? Did cultural norms or weather severity decide who slept with whom? You lean into the image of such a night. The soundscape is intimate, soft breathing, occasional snores, a child's whimper hushed by a gentle hand. The warmth is palpable, not just physical but emotional, the sense that you are never truly alone in the dark. The fire may falter, the hides may flap, but human bodies together create a sanctuary no storm can fully breach. Your own senses fill in the gaps. You feel the press of fur against your cheek, the slow rhythm of someone's chest rising beside you, the faint smell of skin warmed by smoke and animal fat. It isn't glamorous, but it is deeply human, the way survival often is. In this closeness, trust is unspoken, everybody depends on everybody else, and nobody pretends otherwise. And as you lie there, eyes heavy, you realize that the warmth you feel isn't just heat, it's kinship, it's memory, it's the reminder that survival isn't solitary. It's shared breath, shared space, shared nights. Out here, in the endless snow, the warmth of a body beside you is the difference between freezing and waking to another day. The fire burns steady, the quilts of fur hold tight, and yet your attention drifts to the smallest figures in the lodge, babies. In a world this cold, where even adults risk frostbite in minutes, how did tiny bodies survive the night? You watch as a young mother lifts her infant from her side, the child swaddled tightly in layers of fur and moss, nestled into a cradle board that is more than just a carrier. It is a tiny fortress against the cold. Mainstream historians emphasize that cradle boards were essential tools of survival. A baby bound in one was not left bare to the winter air. Beneath the wrappings, absorbent moss lined the frame, working like a natural diaper while adding insulation. Furs wrapped around the whole structure, sometimes lashed with hide thongs so no draft could sneak in. It was practical, yes, but also ingenious. That small, rigid board kept the infant warm, dry, and protected, even on nights when the cold rattled the very bones of the lodge. And then there's a quirky tidbit that surfaces from some frontier accounts. In particularly, cold nights, parents sometimes tucked heated stones carefully wrapped near the foot of the cradle board. Others say they placed the entire cradle board close to the mother's side, sliding it beneath the same coverings so her warmth radiated into the infant's cocoon. Imagine the odd sight of a rigid, fur-wrapped bundle pressed right up against its mother, both breathing in sync, 2 lives tied together by the simplest of arrangements. But scholars continue to argue over whether infants were always kept in cradle boards through the night or if, in winter, swaddling alone was more common. Some anthropologists argue that cradle boards limited flexibility, making it harder to keep a baby warm with shared body heat. Others counter that the careful layering and moss lining were precisely what made them safe in such climates. The archaeological record naturally leaves no infant bedding behind, and so the debate lingers unresolved. You imagine the sensory details of such a scene. The mother's breath curls over the fur, misting in the low firelight. The baby shifts faintly, but no cry comes, the swaddling soothes, the warmth holds steady. You notice the faint scent of cedar bark woven into the wrappings, a touch believed to bring both health and spiritual protection. The cradle board itself leans slightly at an angle against the mother's bedding, tilted so the infant feels cradled as if still in arms. And beyond practicality, the cradle board carries cultural weight. It symbolizes belonging, the child tied both physically and spiritually into the community. When the family lies down to sleep, they do so knowing the smallest among them is held fast, safe against the winter. It isn't just about survival, it's about trust, about the continuity of life, even when the night presses hardest. As you watch the mother settle back, her hand brushing gently across the swaddled fur. You feel a hush settle in the lodge. The fire crackles, the hides flex faintly. But here in this corner, the quiet warmth of a newborn radiates more powerfully than the flames. And you realize that survival isn't measured only in how adults endure, but in how the most fragile lives are carried through the storm. Your gaze shifts from the cradleboard to the edges of the bedding, where movement stirs in the dim light. A dog stretches, shakes its fur, and circles once before, curling back into a ball at someone's feet. Another lifts its head, ears twitching at the wind outside, then drops it again against the furs. You realize with a smile that even here, in the bitterest season, dogs are not just guardians or hunters, they're blankets. Historians point out that dogs were the first domesticated animals in the Americas, long before horses arrived with Europeans. For native families, they were companions, workers, and sometimes dinner bells. But on winter nights, they served another vital role: living heaters. Their thick coats, bred to withstand the cold, gave off warmth that humans could borrow. People didn't simply tolerate dogs in the lodge, they welcomed them onto bedding, especially near children's feet. That warmth could mean the difference between shivering through the night and waking comfortably. There's a quirky tidbit recorded in oral accounts. Some children had a favorite dog they insisted on sleeping beside, treating it like a personal heater. Parents indulged them, knowing the dog's loyalty and body heat both had their uses. One story even mentions that families joked about which dog was the warmest blanket, as if competing for the prime spot beside the fire. It turns the harshness of survival into something almost playful, where necessity meets affection. And yet scholars still debate the extent of this role. Were dogs consistently allowed to share bedding in every tribe, or was it more situational? Some anthropologists argue that concerns over fleas or hygiene may have limited this practice, while others counter that, in the brutal cold, practicality always outweighed scruples. The evidence, as usual, is mixed, leaving the question open-ended. Still, you can imagine the sensation clearly. The dog at your feet radiates steady warmth, its breathing slow and comforting. The faint scent of animal musk blends with smoke and hide, earthy but oddly reassuring. The weight of its body pins the fur down, keeping drafts from sneaking under. You stretch your toes against its side, and it shifts closer, as if instinctively guarding you from the cold. Beyond warmth, there's companionship in this arrangement. Dogs weren't just animals, they were part of the household, woven into the daily rhythm of survival. Their ears pricked at danger, their bodies warmed the bedding, their presence offered a sense of security in the dark. Out here, in a world where wolves howled just beyond the circle of light, a dog inside the lodge was more than comfort. It was reassurance. The fire pops, the wind keens faintly at the smoke hole, but you hardly notice. Between furs, family, and the steady warmth of curled dogs, the night feels less threatening. You find yourself sinking into that timeless bond, marveling that something as simple as a loyal animal could tip the balance between fear and rest. And so you drift, warmed not only by hides and fire, but by the steady breath of companions who never questioned their place at your side. Survival here wasn't solitary. Even the dogs helped carry it through the long, frozen night. The dogs settle, the fire hums, and yet your eyes are drawn upward. Above the glowing circle of flames, smoke gathers in a wavering column, slipping out through a hole at the top of the lodge. You realize this opening is no accident. It's the smoke hole, that strange compromise between warmth and breathability. Without it, the lodge would choke in its own haze. With it, the bitter air can creep in. It's a delicate balance, argued about as fiercely in camp as it is among scholars centuries later. Historians often emphasize that smoke holes were adjustable. A flap of hide could be tied open or closed, depending on the wind, with poles used to shift its angle. Families became meteorologists of the night, reading gusts by ear and instinct, adjusting the vent so smoke escaped without inviting drafts. You imagine someone stirring at midnight, tugging a cord to tilt the flap, muttering softly as they tried to appease both fire and frost. There's a quirky tidbit from some oral traditions. People told stories of spirits that rode the smoke, slipping through the hole to carry prayers to the sky. Children sometimes whispered wishes into the rising haze, half game, half belief. The smoke hole wasn't just ventilation. It was a portal, a bridge between worlds. To a tired child staring upward in the dark, the glowing shaft of sparks might look like a ladder for ancestors. Yet scholars continue to debate how efficient these openings really were. Some argue that smoke holes in buffalo hide typis let out too much heat to be truly effective, making interiors far colder than memory suggests. Others counter that proper angling and overlapping hides created a chimney effect that drew smoke upward while minimizing drafts. Archaeological data is scarce, and so the argument smolders unresolved, much like the embers beneath you. You lie back, studying the vent above. Cold air seeps faintly along the edges, kissing your cheeks. But without it, the smoke would sting your lungs, blur your eyes, and make sleep impossible. The trade-off is inescapable. Breathe easier and risk a chill, or seal tight and suffocate slowly. The people who lived here didn't theorize, they adapted, shifting hides as naturally as you might adjust a window. Your senses drink in the detail. The faint glow of sparks rises through the smoke hole, bright against the dark sky beyond. The wind sometimes moans through the gap, a soft flute-like sound that twines with the fire's hiss. The smell of wood smoke clings to your skin, sharp but oddly comforting, as if reminding you you're alive with each breath. It dawns on you that the smoke hole is more than architecture. It is compromise embodied. Every winter lodge carried this small, necessary weakness, an opening that could not be fully sealed, a vulnerability that made life possible. And as you watch the sparks vanish into the night, you feel the strange reassurance of it, that survival isn't about perfection, but about learning to live with small losses. You lie there under the quilts of fur, warmed by fire and by dogs curled at your feet, when suddenly the wind rises again. It lashes the lodge with a force that makes the hides tremble. The poles groan faintly overhead. For a moment, you are reminded that outside this fragile shelter stretches a plain of endless cold, and yet inside, the storm takes on a different sound. It is muffled, softened, transformed into something you can almost fall asleep to. Historians have noted how the acoustics of a hide-covered lodge created a unique soundscape. Wind that would howl brutally in the open air drummed gently against the taut surfaces, turning violence into rhythm. The hides acted like a giant drumskin, vibrating with each gust. For families huddled inside, this steady percussion became part of the night. Some accounts even describe it as comforting, a reminder that while winter raged outside, the lodge was holding firm. There's a quirky tidbit in oral lore. Children sometimes pretended the wind was a giant animal pouring at their lodge trying to get in. They laughed at the thumps and flutters, turning fear into play. Parents encouraged these stories, perhaps because they lessened the terror of storms that could last for days. You picture a little one giggling under the furs, whispering that the sky bear is scratching again. Yet scholars still debate just how secure these lodges were against the fiercest blizzards. Some argue that no matter how tightly hides were lashed, snow and wind inevitably found their way in, chilling the interior. Others suggest that with enough layers and constant attention, the lodges were remarkably resilient, keeping families surprisingly warm even in brutal conditions. The archaeological record leaves only post holes and charred fire pits, so the arguments remain unresolved, like the sigh of wind through poles. The sensory experience is unmistakable. The wind outside roars, but here it becomes a muted heartbeat against the walls. The fire cracks in counterpoint, offering its own rhythm. Together, they form a lullaby of survival, the storm and the hearth singing in duet. You feel the vibration of each gust through the floor, a low thrum that travels up your spine, not frightening but grounding. It's the music of winter life, unavoidable yet strangely reassuring. You breathe deeply, filling your lungs with smoke-tinged air, and realize how the sound changes your perception of the storm. Outside, you would hear chaos. Inside, you hear persistence. The lodge doesn't silence the storm, it reshapes it into something survivable, even soothing. And as your eyes flutter heavy, you find yourself grateful for the steady drumming, a reminder that the world beyond may rage, but within these hides you are cradled in rhythm. The wind fades to a steady murmur, and with it your other senses heighten. You inhale, and the night delivers its own perfume. Wood smoke thick and sweet, leather warm from firelight, dried meat hanging in strips that give off a faintly savory tang. These are the smells of winter survival, stitched into the fabric of the lodge. You can almost taste them on your tongue, layered like the hides overhead. Historians often remind us that smoke wasn't merely a nuisance, it was preservation. Meats, fish, even berries were hung in the rafters where the fire's smoke curled. The constant exposure dried them, warded off rot and flavored them too. The lodge itself became both home and smokehouse. And the smell? It clung to everything. Clothes, hair, bedding, even skin. For people inside, it was the smell of comfort, of safety, of food waiting when storms made hunting impossible. There's a quirky little note from early European visitors who remarked that native lodges smelled so strongly of smoke and leather that they tasted it in their beards for weeks. Imagine stepping outside after a night here, carrying that scent wherever you went. For the villagers themselves, it was hardly noticed, just part of existence, as natural as the air itself. But scholars still wrangle over how healthy this smoky world was. Did constant inhalation of wood smoke damage lungs over generations? Or did people adapt? Some argue high mortality from respiratory illness hints at the cost, while others suggest resilience was greater than we assume. Without medical records, it remains an open-ended question, lingering in the haze above the embers. You close your eyes and let the scent fill you more deeply. Smoke curls into your hair, rich and resinous. The hides around you give off an earthy musk, softened by age and use. From the corner, a faint sweetness drifts, perhaps dried berries hung in a pouch, their sugars caramelized by heat. The air is thick, layered, textured, every breath carrying the story of the lodge. For the families living here, those smells weren't just background, they were reassurance. If the lodge smelled of smoke, the fire was alive. If it smelled of meat, there was food to share. If the hides gave off their musk, the walls were intact, holding strong against the storm. Even your sense of smell became part of survival, part of the nightly inventory that told you without words that you were safe. And so you settle deeper under your furs, eyelids heavy, lungs filling with the rich perfume of wood and hide. Outside, the storm is scentless, blank, merciless. Inside, the world is saturated, comforting, alive. It is not perfume in the modern sense, it is the smell of endurance, of life that refuses to yield. The smells linger thick in the air, but soon another layer of the night's survival emerges. Sound not from storm or fire, but from human voices. As the lodge quiets, you hear an elder begin to speak. The words are low, deliberate, the cadence rising and falling like the crackle of embers. Around you, children lean closer, eyes half-lidded but ears wide open. Stories fill the darkness as surely as warmth fills the furs. Historians emphasize that storytelling was central to winter life. Long nights, when work was done and storms kept families indoors, became seasons of oral history. Myths, genealogies, hunting tales, trickster stories all passed from voice to ear, ensuring that nothing important was lost. Survival wasn't only about body heat, it was about memory, identity, continuity. Without these tales, the cold nights would swallow more than just warmth, they would swallow meaning. And here's a quirky little tidbit you might not expect. Some tribes believed children would sleep more peacefully if the last words they heard at night were stories of heroes or animals. Mischievous creatures like coyote or raven made perfect bedtime company. Imagine drifting off while someone describes raven stealing light from the sky, or coyote tricking stronger animals with his cleverness. Laughter mixed with yawns, and dreams picked up where the story trailed off. Yet scholars still discuss how much of these tales were strictly for children, and how much were community lessons disguised as entertainment. Were winter stories merely to pass the time, or were they structured teaching moments? Some argue they were mnemonic devices to preserve complex histories. Others claim they were deliberately moralistic. The line between entertainment and education blurs, as it often does in oral traditions. You listen more closely. The elder's voice hums steady, the firelight flickering across lined features, hands gesturing slowly. Each pause hangs heavy in the air, filled with expectation. A child giggles at a familiar part of the story, and an adult shushes gently, though a smile tugs at the corner of their lips. The rhythm is hypnotic. The hush of voices, the occasional bark of a dog outside, the snap of resin in the fire. Your senses absorb it all. The cadence of the story seeps into your breathing, slowing your chest. The warmth of the bedding fuses with the warmth of words. You realize how powerful this ritual was. Stories softened the mind, making the cold less sharp, the night less threatening. By the time silence returned, people weren't lying awake listening to the storm, they were already wandering the dream worlds the elder had opened for them. And so you let yourself drift, hearing a tale that is both ancient and immediate, a tale that turns the darkness itself into company. In this lodge, winter nights aren't empty. They're full of voices, memory, and the gentle magic of words that lull you into dreams. The elder's story fades, leaving behind a hush as soft as the furs wrapped around you. Yet the lodge is never entirely silent. From a corner comes the slow, steady thump of a drum. Not loud, not ceremonial, but gentle like a heartbeat extended into the night. Someone taps it idly, the rhythm slow enough to merge with breathing. Around you, bodies adjust, exhale, and begin to follow that sound into sleep. Historians note that rhythm played a role not just in ceremonies but in everyday life. A drum's pulse, or even the repeated sound of someone humming, could help calm a restless night. The Plains peoples understood that humans sync unconsciously to rhythm. By aligning breath and heart to steady beats, you could coax yourself and your children towards sleep. In winter lodges, where storms rattled the hides and fear might otherwise keep eyes open, rhythm created peace. And then there's a quirky little detail. Some accounts tell of women rocking cradleboards against the floor in time with their own heartbeat. The babies would quiet, lulled by the combined thump of wood and flesh. Travelers sometimes mistook this for formal music, when in truth it was as practical as a lullaby. Imagine that sound, the soft double thud of a mother's chest, and the cradleboard against the earth, perfectly matched. A primitive, yet profoundly human metronome. Still, scholars debate whether such night drumming was widespread practice or just occasional. Was it a routine, a nightly ritual in many lodges, or was it reserved for restless evenings when storms howled too fiercely for easy sleep? Some ethnographers argue that continuous rhythm was central, others suggest its romanticized memory. The truth likely shifts like the drumbeat itself, sometimes steady, sometimes absent. Your senses lean into it. You feel the vibration more than you hear it. Low, resonant, traveling through fur, hide, and bone. It mingles with the crack of the fire and the faint moans of wind at the smoke hole. Your chest begins to match it, breath deepening, shoulders loosening. The entire lodge breathes as one, a small community sync to a beat as old as time. You let your imagination stretch outward. Perhaps in another lodge nearby, another drum hums, another family drifts into rhythm. Across the camp, scattered circles of fire and hide, 100 small heartbeats join in an invisible chorus. The storm rages outside, but inside, the night belongs to rhythm, to steady sound that softens the edges of fear. And as your eyelids sag, you realize this was part of survival too, not just heat and hides, but sound. A heartbeat carried into wood, a reminder that life continues, steady and strong, even in the depths of winter. In that thrum, you find comfort, and in that comfort, you find sleep. The drumbeat fades, replaced once more by the quiet shifting of bodies beneath furs. The fire hums low, the dogs sigh, and yet within the stillness of the lodge there remains an invisible structure, an arrangement that shapes where each person sleeps. You look around and notice it isn't random. Men lie closer to the walls, where drafts may creep in and where a watchful ear can catch any sound beyond. Women and children cluster in the heart, pressed close to the warmth, cocooned in the safest place. It is a pattern repeated across winters, written into survival itself. Historians often describe how gender roles extended even into sleep. Among many plains tribes, men took the outer positions in the lodge, not because they were warmer, but because they were colder. They absorbed the edge of the drafts, their bodies forming the first line of protection against the outside world. Women, who nurtured the children and tended the fires, stayed toward the center where the heat collected. In this way, the very layout of rest mirrored the layout of life, each role complementary, each sacrifice part of the whole. And there's a quirky little tidbit whispered in old accounts. Sometimes men teased one another about who snored loudest, claiming it helped scare away evil spirits or even prowling animals outside the lodge. Imagine a family chuckling as a warrior's thunderous snoring rattled the hides, half amusement, half reassurance. In a world where wolves howled beyond the firelight, maybe a good snore really did sound like protection. Yet anthropologists still discuss how rigid these patterns were. Did all families strictly follow this placement, or did comfort often win out? Some evidence suggests the arrangement was flexible. Elders might be given the warmest place, or a mother with a newborn might sleep nearer the fire regardless of gender expectations. Others argue the arrangement held strong, a nightly rehearsal of communal duty. The truth, as usual, may lie in the shifting lines of memory and circumstance. You take in the sensory detail of such a scene. To your left, a man shifts, his outlines silhouetted against the faint draft creeping under the hide. His breath mists in the chill, but he does not stir fully awake. He has learned to endure that edge of cold. At your center, a woman draws a fur tighter around two small children, her hand gently pressing their backs as if to remind them they are safe. Near the fire, another elder stirs, tossing a log onto the embers with the instinct of someone who has done so 1,000 nights before. The arrangement is practical, but it is also deeply symbolic. The lodge becomes a microcosm of society itself. Men outward-facing, ready for danger. Women inward, guarding the future. Children at the very core, the flame around which everything else is arranged. In that circle, you see not just survival but philosophy, a living diagram of how these people understood themselves and their world. Your imagination drifts further. You think of how different this is from the individual beds and bedrooms of modern life. Here, privacy dissolves into closeness. Every cough, every shift, every sigh is shared. The smell of one's skin becomes the smell of all. You cannot separate yourself from the others, nor from their roles. In this lodge, you are one body with many parts, each keeping the others alive. There's an intimacy to this closeness that extends beyond warmth. Whispers travel easily in the dark, words exchange softly as children doze. A husband leans toward his wife, murmuring something that makes her lips curl into a smile even as she feigns sleep. Across the lodge, a grandmother hums faintly, her voice so low it blends with the fire's crackle. The arrangement isn't only defensive, it is deeply human, layered with affection and memory. And yet the scholar's question lingers in the background. Was this rigidly prescribed, or was it fluid like so much of life? Perhaps the arrangement changed night by night, storm by storm. Perhaps the rule was less a rule and more a rhythm, flexible as breath itself. The evidence is murky, leaving you with the picture but not the certainty. You imagine the physical sensations of this placement. On the outer edge, the floor feels colder, and the hides flutter more often with gusts of wind. Your shoulder brushes against the taut wall, vibrating faintly with each storm beat. Toward the center, the warmth grows thicker, layered by bodies as much as furs. The air is richer here, heavy with smoke and breath. You move inward and feel your muscles release, the cold at your extremities easing. The contrast is stark, a bodily reminder of why the arrangement mattered. And then there is the symbolism again, tugging at you. In the heart of the storm, this small circle has drawn its own map of the world, its edges braced by guardians, its center cradling the future. To live this way is to sleep each night inside a story of who you are and what you owe. Each body position is a promise whispered without words. I will guard you. I will keep you warm. I will see you safely to morning. Outside, the wind claws still, wolves pacing beyond the glow. But inside, the pattern holds, night after night, generation after generation. And as you nestle deeper into your imagined place at the center, you feel the immense comfort of that order. It is not a prison, not a restriction. It is a map of care, drawn by necessity, lit by fire, remembered in warmth. The drumbeat may have faded, but the rhythm persists in the breathing of the men at the edges, in the sighs of women cradling children, in the steady rise and fall of warmth across the lodge. Together, they form a chorus of endurance, a living shield against the long winter night. And as your eyelids grow heavy again, you realize that even sleep here is communal. Even dreams are shared. To drift away in this circle is to let go, trusting that others will hold the edges of the world until you wake again. The lodge is quiet now, the breathing steady, the furs heavy with shared heat. But beneath the stillness, hunger often lingered, gnawing at bellies through the long winter nights. Food was precious, and in the leanest seasons, survival meant making do with less than comfort. You shift slightly under the coverings, your imagination sliding into that reality, trying to fall asleep while your stomach twists and grumbles, the emptiness as sharp as the wind outside. Historians remind us that winter was the cruelest season for native families, especially on the plains. Summer hunts and autumn harvests filled caches with dried meat, berries, corn, and squash, but deep snows often cut off hunting grounds and depleted stores. Starvation was not uncommon. Families learned to ration carefully, measuring each portion so supplies might last until spring. Sometimes this meant going to bed with only a few bites in your belly. You weren't alone in that emptiness, everyone felt it. Even children. Hunger was part of winter's embrace. And then there's a quirky tidbit worth lingering on. Some traditions spoke of fasting during harsh stretches, not only as necessity, but as an opportunity. A vision quest forced by hunger might bring dreams of guidance, spirit animals, or ancestors. A starving body wasn't just weak, it was also thought to be porous, open to visions. So, while some lay awake gnawing on desperation, others whispered that emptiness could be a teacher. Imagine lying in the lodge, stomach hollow, drifting into dreams vivid enough to feel like journeys, as though hunger itself pulled you into another world. Yet scholars continue to wrestle with the question of how widespread such ritualized fasting was in the dead of winter. Was it truly embraced? Or was it rationalization in times of scarcity? Did families encourage children to see hunger as sacred? Or was it simply endured with gritted teeth? The ethnographic evidence splits. Some accounts describe deliberate fasting ceremonies. Others suggest hunger was too brutal to be framed so neatly. The debate is unresolved. Like so much of winter life, half necessity, half meaning. You let your senses explore what it might have felt like. You taste the faint tang of dried meat lingering in your mouth, a sliver eaten hours before. The smell of smoke, once comforting, now teases with the memory of food it preserved. Your stomach growls loudly enough that you glance around, embarrassed. Though no one stirs, everyone else shares the same complaint. In the dark, you rub your belly, wishing it quiet. The warmth of the furs cannot fill the emptiness inside. Still, there are gestures of resilience woven into these nights. A mother might hand a child a roasted marrow bone to suck, not for nutrition but for comfort. An elder might distract the young with a story, filling their imaginations with visions instead of food. And sometimes, the act of simply lying close, sharing warmth, sharing breath, softened the edge of hunger. Misery divided is misery lessened. You can almost feel a hand squeeze your shoulder in the dark, wordlessly promising, "We will last until spring." The hunger sharpens your awareness. Every sound is louder, every smell more vivid. You notice the faint sweetness of berries stored in a pouch near the wall. You hear the crackle of the fire and imagine it as the snap of roasting fat, though no feast awaits. You breathe in leather and fur, pretending for a moment it's roasted meat. Survival isn't just physical, it's imaginative, the ability to endure what you lack by transforming it in your mind. You drift into that half-dreaming state hunger brings. The fire's glow becomes a vision. You see bison roaming endless fields, their bodies massive, steaming in the frost. You smell roasting fat, hear the thunder of hooves, feel the fullness of a future hunt. Is this dream hunger's cruelty or hunger's gift? The line is blurred, and you realize that perhaps both are true. Hunger weakens, but hunger also opens doors. Yet dawn always arrives, whether bellies are full or empty. In the morning, families rise slowly, joints stiff, hunger heavier. Some prepare to risk the cold for hunting, others ration dried corn into a thin gruel. Children whimper, parents soothe, and the cycle of survival continues. Hunger does not vanish, but it is endured, woven into winter life as firmly as fire or fur. You return to your furs, stomach grumbling, and think about how different your own modern comfort is. You could reach for food with ease, but here, the long night offers no relief. The lesson is humbling. Survival in the winter lodge was never guaranteed, even with fire and hides. It required patience, rationing, and sometimes the willingness to dream through the emptiness. And so you curl tighter, acknowledging the hunger as part of the night. It sharpens, it softens, it teaches. The storm outside rages on, but in here, even with nothing in your belly, you cling to the warmth, the closeness, and the stubborn knowledge that morning will come. The fire flickers low again, its light rolling shadows across the hides, and you notice something subtle yet ingenious. The bedding and coverings you rest under are not just purpose-made quilts. They are also the very clothes worn in the day. Heavy parkas, leggings, cloaks, moccasins, all of it serves double duty. By nightfall, garments become bedding, and bedding becomes garments again at dawn. Nothing goes unused in a world where resources are limited, and the cold waits for any chance to seep in. Historians emphasize that winter clothing among native peoples was far more than decoration. Parkas lined with fur, leggings stitched from supple hides, cloaks sewn from feathered skins, they were essential armor. At night, these same items weren't folded neatly aside. They were spread beneath sleepers as padding or pulled over bodies as extra covers. An entire household might strip off layers and lay them out like a patchwork mattress, then pull heavier cloaks over the top. What had served as defense against the snow by day became a cocoon of protection by night. And there's a quirky little tidbit preserved in journals from early explorers. They sometimes mistook the piles of clothing and hides for chaos, complaining that lodges looked untidy. But those same observers later admitted that families emerged from such heaps, surprisingly warm and rested. What appeared like disorder to outsiders was actually strategy, each garment given a second shift of duty. Imagine tucking your fur-lined moccasins beside your chest, not because you feared losing them, but because their warmth helped lull you into sleep. Still, scholars argue over how effective this practice truly was. Could garments designed for mobility in the day really insulate as well as bedding designed for sleep? Some suggest it was mostly supplemental clothing added to existing quilts and mats when supplies ran thin. Others believe this dual use was standard. The line between clothing and bedding blurred almost completely. Archaeology offers only fragments, scraps of fur, remnants of stitching, leaving much to speculation. You picture the tactile reality of it. A soft parka, still carrying the faint musk of smoke and sweat from the day's labor, is spread beneath you as a cushion. A cloak of feathers drapes over your shoulders, its shafts crackling softly as you move. Moccasins, warm from the fire, are tucked against your feet, turning into slippers of the night. The entire arrangement smells of tanned hide and wood smoke, earthy but comforting, wrapping you not just in warmth but in the familiar essence of daily life. It is intimate too. Families didn't own vast wardrobes. Garments were few and precious. That cloak you wore in the hunt is also the cloak your child pulls over herself in sleep. That parka handed down from grandmother warms her grandchildren through the night. Clothing here is communal, fluid, passed from body to body, shifting roles with each hour. The very fabric of daily survival becomes the blanket of nightly rest. There's also something symbolic at work. Clothing carried status, identity, and sometimes spiritual meaning decorated with quills, beads, or painted patterns. To sleep beneath it was not only practical but also protective in a cultural sense. The designs themselves, seen in the glow of the fire, may have offered reassurance. Painted animals watching over, sacred colors reminding of strength. In this way, bedding became more than insulation. It became a shield of memory and meaning. The sensory details fold deeper into you. You feel the rough seam of a parka pressing into your cheek, the softness of fur brushing your neck. Your breath warms the feathers of a cloak, causing them to rustle faintly, as if alive. Each garment carries echoes of the day's effort, the hunt, the gathering, the chores, and yet here they transform, shifting from labor to comfort. You imagine too the practical gestures. At night, clothing might be carefully arranged so that dampness from snow could dry by the fire's warmth. In the morning, garments would be pulled back on, already warmed, ready for another day of braving the storm. Nothing was wasted, nothing idle. Every object in the lodge carried two lives, one for daylight, one for the night. And it strikes you, as you drift further into this imagined warmth, that survival wasn't only about inventing new things, it was also about bending what you already had to multiple purposes. A parka is not just a parka, it is also a mattress, a quilt, a comfort for a child. A cloak is not just clothing, it is also a shield for dreams. The ingenuity here lies in refusing to separate life into compartments. Day and night blur, garment and bedding blend, practicality and intimacy intertwine. Outside, the storm claws still, but inside you are wrapped in layers that carry both memory and meaning. You feel the garments heavy on your chest, smell the smoke woven into their fibers, and realize how clever this system truly was. No object lies idle. Everything works together. And so, as your eyelids sag again, you learn a lesson whispered by centuries of survival. Sometimes the things that protect you by day must follow you into night, guarding not just your body but your dreams. The night stretches on, and though the lodge feels like a cocoon, not everyone sleeps deeply until dawn. Someone always rises, not only to feed the fire but to step outside. The flap stirs, cold air rushes in, and you hear soft footsteps crunch into snow. These are the moonlit patrols, the silent checks that guard not only the fire inside but the life of the camp beyond. Historians describe how men in particular took turns venturing into the darkness, ensuring that ponies tethered nearby hadn't wandered or been stolen. Horses were not simply transport, they were survival. Without them, hunting or moving camp would be far harder. A storm might frighten them into bolting, or raiders might sneak close, hoping to cut them loose. And so, while others slept, someone would wrap a cloak tightly, step into the bitter cold, and vanish into the night to circle the herd. There's a quirky tidbit you might enjoy. Some accounts say these patrols weren't always solemn. Young men, restless under the furs, would sometimes welcome the excuse to escape the smoky lodge. Out under the stars, they might sing softly to themselves, talk to the ponies as if to children, or even joke later that the horses were warmer company than the snoring uncle left behind. You can almost hear a muffled chuckle as a young man leans against a shaggy pony, the beast's breath steaming in the frozen air. Yet scholars still debate how systematic these patrols were. Were they scheduled with military precision, or more informal, handled by whoever stirred at the right moment. Some anthropologists argue that vigilance had to be strict, especially in areas where raids were common. Others suggest that in smaller, safer camps, patrols may have been casual, an elder taking a walk, a hunter restless before dawn. The evidence is too fragmentary to say with certainty, leaving you to picture both possibilities. Strict watches in some places, quiet wanderings in others. You step outside in your imagination, following the patrol. The cold bites immediately, sharper after the lodge's warmth. Your breath plumes white into the night, and every sound is magnified: the creak of snow underfoot, the soft whicker of horses, the distant crack of ice shifting on a river. Above, the moon hangs like a lantern, bathing the plain in silver. The snow glitters, as if sprinkled with shards of glass. It is beautiful, yes, but also dangerous in its emptiness. You walk among the ponies. Their shaggy coats ripple as they shift, their eyes reflecting faint light, watching you calmly. You reach out, touch one's mane, and feel heat beneath the frost. They are alive, warm, breathing, and you realize their presence is a comfort, a reminder that not all warmth comes from fire. You listen for wolves, for raiders, for any sign that the night hides more than silence. The stillness presses, vast and unbroken, until even your own heartbeat feels too loud. Then you return to the lodge, flap closing behind you, carrying the cold with you for a moment before it fades back into warmth. The others stir faintly, but no one wakes fully. Your body aches from the brief exposure, but you know the patrol mattered. You know the camp breathes easier because you stepped outside. The sensory contrasts linger. The lodge is smoky, muffled, dense with humanity. The night is clear, sharp, filled with starlight and the crunch of frozen ground. Moving between them is like passing between worlds, one fragile but warm, the other eternal but merciless. The patrol bridges them, ensuring that the fragile cocoon inside can endure in the face of the vast cold outside. You imagine doing this night after night, year after year. Sometimes nothing happens, only silence and stars. Sometimes danger appears: wolves circling too close, horses restless with unease, a shadow on the horizon that could mean raiders. The patrol is not glamorous, but it is necessary, part of the rhythm of winter life. And so you settle back into your furs, warmed by the knowledge that while you drift towards sleep again, someone else has walked the perimeter, spoken softly to the ponies, and listened to the howls of the night. You realize that survival wasn't only about what happened inside the lodge. It was also about those quiet steps in the snow, those moonlit moments when vigilance kept the camp whole. The lesson presses gently against your thoughts. True rest is possible only when someone else is watching. And here, in this ancient winter camp, the balance is perfect: half of the world asleep, half awake, and all of it bound together under the same silver moon. The patrol returns, the flap closes, and the lodge exhales into stillness again. You shift under your furs, eyes half shut, and begin to notice how the night has its own inner world. Sleep here is not always dreamless. In the hush of the firelight, where smoke curls and bodies breathe together, dreams themselves become part of survival. They are not idle imaginings but messengers, stitched into the culture as tightly as hides are stitched into the lodge. Historians often note that dreams carried significance among many native peoples, especially during the long winters when nights stretched endlessly. Shamans, elders, and ordinary dreamers alike listened closely to the stories told by sleep. A dream could foretell a hunt, warn of sickness, or reveal guidance from the spirit world. In this way, the lodge at night was more than a shelter, it was a portal. Families fell asleep, not just into rest, but into another layer of existence where meaning awaited. And there's a quirky tidbit from certain oral traditions. Some people would deliberately try to shape their dreams by sleeping with objects near them: stones, feathers, or small bundles of herbs. It was believed these items could invite specific visions. Imagine tucking a feather beneath your head and whispering a request to dream of birds, hoping for guidance on migration or weather. Or slipping a carved stone beside you, asking ancestors to speak. In the stillness of a winter night, such rituals blurred the line between practicality and magic. Yet scholars continue to argue over how literally these dream practices should be taken. Were they universal, followed by entire communities, or primarily the realm of shamans and vision seekers? Some anthropologists claim that everyone gave weight to dreams, weaving them into morning conversations. Others believe the focus was narrower, reserved for spiritual specialists. The debate remains unsettled, like the lingering haze of a half-remembered dream at dawn. You let yourself drift into such a dreamscape now. The fire dims until its glow is no brighter than a heartbeat. Smoke swirls, and within it you see shapes buffalo with steaming breath, birds beating against the ceiling hides, ancestors' faces shimmering like frost on river ice. The dream is vivid, too vivid to dismiss, and you understand why it carried such importance. Dreams here are not entertainment. They are lessons carved into the night. Your senses deepen into the experience. You feel the heaviness of sleep pressing you down, but within that heaviness comes freedom. The cold outside vanishes. The storm no longer matters. Instead, you walk in green fields, smell summer grass, hear laughter of voices long gone. The dream offers reprieve from winter's grip, reminding you that warmth exists, that hardship is temporary. Perhaps this is why dreams were treasured. They gave not only prophecy, but hope. Others stir in their sleep. A child whimpers faintly, turning under the covers. A man mutters words you cannot catch, his brow furrowing, his dream tugging at him. In the morning, such murmurs might be shared around the fire, interpreted by elders or shamans. Did the dream mean danger? Did it promise abundance? The very act of sharing kept the dream alive, weaving it into the fabric of community life. There is intimacy in this as well. Imagine lying beside family members, hearing their sighs and whispers as they dream. You are part of their inner journeys, even if only as an observer. In this lodge, dreams are not solitary, they spill into the group, carried by breath and murmur. Just as warmth is shared, so too are visions. And yet, you sense the darker edge. Not all dreams are comforting. Nightmares, too, come in the cold, sharpened by hunger and fear. Wolves appear in shadowy forms. Storms crush lodges in terrifying visions. For some, these nightmares were warnings. For others, they were spirits testing the mind. Even fear had to be honored, listened to, carried into the daylight for meaning. The fire pops, waking you briefly from your reverie. You blink at the glowing embers, then close your eyes again. The lodge hums with breath, the hides creak with wind, and you surrender once more to the dream world. You understand now that in this culture, survival wasn't just about enduring the physical night. It was also about listening to the unseen voices that came when your eyes closed. And so, in the depth of winter, you find that sleep itself becomes a bridge. On one side lies the harsh world of frost and hunger. On the other lies a realm where ancestors speak, animals guide, and visions soothe. Both are necessary. Both shape the rhythm of life. Wrapped in hides, warmed by family, you drift not just into slumber but into stories that echo beyond the night. The dreams fade with the slow crawl of night, and when your eyes open again, it is to the faintest light creeping through the smoke hole. Dawn doesn't rush here, it seeps in, thin and grey, softening the shadows inside the lodge. Your breath fogs in the cool air, and when you touch the hide walls, you find them stiff with frost. The night's heat, though carefully guarded, could not keep every corner warm. Thin crystals of ice sparkle where condensation gathered and froze, glittering like fragile jewels in the first light of morning. Historians often describe this phenomenon. Frost forming on the inner walls of winter lodges, the result of human breath, rising warmth, and bitter cold colliding. Families would wake to see their shelters gleaming faintly, as if a hidden hand had painted them with silver. It wasn't simply decoration, though it was a reminder of how close the cold always lurked, pressing in, ready to reclaim the night if vigilance lapsed. And there's a quirky little tidbit that some oral traditions recall. Children often drew shapes in that morning frost, just as modern children doodle on fogged windows. Little finger trails zigzagging across the hides, circles, animals, even handprints. It turned the harsh evidence of winter into a moment of play, laughter rising in the smoky dawn. Imagine a grandmother scolding lightly while hiding a smile, saying the lodge wasn't a canvas but secretly enjoying the way children left their art on the very walls that kept them alive. Yet scholars still debate how severe these frosts really were. Were lodges warm enough that only a thin rim of ice formed? Or were interiors so cold that frost coated every surface by dawn? Accounts vary wildly. Some explorers wrote of lodges surprisingly cozy, while others described them as nearly as cold as the outdoors once the fire burned down. Archaeology offers little clarity, leaving the question suspended like the crystals themselves, glimmering and fragile. You imagine the sensory experience of waking in such a place. Your breath makes little clouds with every exhale. The furs around you are warm, but your nose and cheeks tingle with cold. When you shift, frost falls in tiny flakes, dusting your bedding like powdered snow. The fire's embers glow faintly, sending up threads of smoke that catch in the early light. You reach to stir them, your fingers stiff, and the crackle of kindling is the first true sound of morning. The lodge comes alive slowly. A baby fusses, and its mother lifts it from the cradle board, her breath visible in the dimness. Someone coughs into the smoky air, a deep rasp after a night of inhaling wood fumes. A man groans, rolling from the outer edge where drafts chilled him most. Each body carries the mark of the night smoke in the lungs, frost in the hair, stiffness in the joints, and yet they rise, alive. Another night survived. Your senses soak in the transformation. The crackling fire spreads warmth unevenly at first, the air still frigid in the shadows, but soon the lodge feels more alive. The smell of smoke thickens again, layered with the faint scent of fat sizzling as someone warms a scrap of meat. Children laugh at the frost patterns, tracing them with eager fingers. Dogs shake themselves, sending up puffs of frozen fur. Slowly, the cocoon shifts from sleep to motion, readying for another day. There's symbolism here too. The frost, though inconvenient, is proof of resilience. It shows that people and fire together created warmth enough for condensation to form in the first place. Without life inside, there would be no frost, only silence, emptiness, death. The very crystals glimmering on the walls are testimony that breath was drawn, heat was shared, survival continued. And so you sit, rubbing the frost between your fingers, feeling it melt instantly, and reflect on the fragility of life in these winters. Every night was a contest between warmth and cold, and each morning's frost was evidence that the battle had been fought and won. Even if victory was temporary, it was still victory. Outside, the snow stretches endlessly, the wind calmer now, the horizon pale with dawn. Inside, the lodge carries its own dawn embers stirring, children giggling, frost turning to droplets as fire grows. And you realize that the true miracle wasn't just surviving the night, but waking to see another morning glinting off walls of ice that hadn't defeated you. The frost melts slowly as the fire revives, but even before breakfast begins, you notice something important about this space. No one is ever far from their tools. Within the dim light of the lodge, objects are arranged with quiet intention. Knives rest in sheaths beside bedding. A bow leans against a wall, arrows tucked neatly in a quiver within arm's reach. A sewing kit of bone needles and sinew thread lies near a grandmother's furs. It dawns on you that here, even sleep is never truly unarmed. Historians often point out that native winter lodges doubled as arsenals and workshops. Weapons weren't stored in some distant cache. They lived beside their owners. If danger came in the night, whether wolves, raiders, or sudden fire, everything needed to respond was already close at hand. Likewise, the endless mending of clothes and hides didn't pause for storms. Women might sew by the glow of embers late into the night, keeping children warm under the same covers where tools clicked and threads pulled. The lodge was bedroom, kitchen, and workshop all at once. And here's a quirky little tidbit that makes you smile. Some travelers recorded that children sometimes played with miniature bows or carved dolls at bedtime, their toys often smaller versions of the tools their parents used. A boy might fall asleep hugging a tiny bow carved just for him, while a girl clutched a little pouch of beads, practicing the skills she would one day master. Even in slumber, the rhythm of daily work seeped into the dreams of the young. Yet scholars still debate just how heavily armed lodges really were. Were full war bundles and lances kept inside at all times, or only smaller, everyday tools? Some ethnographers suggest the largest weapons were stored communally, while others argue families never let such essentials out of reach. Archaeology leaves us little beyond stone points and bone awls, and the written accounts vary depending on who observed. The truth may have shifted with circumstance, times of peace, allowing looser storage, times of threat tightening every precaution. You look more closely in your imagination. The glint of a blade catches the firelight, its edge honed by careful hands. A spear lies beside a father's bedding, close enough to grasp in half sleep. Across the lodge, a woman's pouch of needles rests open, bits of sinew thread gleaming faintly. These objects are not luxuries, they are lifelines, treated with reverence and practicality. Each family sleeps with survival at their fingertips. Your senses drink in the details. The smell of sharpened stone mingles with smoke, faint but distinct. The feel of polished wood, smooth from use, rests beneath your hand. A soft clink of beads comes as someone shifts, their pouch rattling quietly. Every sound, every touch, every smell reminds you that this is not an idle resting place but a working one, a hub where survival hums even in darkness. There is intimacy in this arrangement too. Imagine lying down beside your bow every night, hand brushing its curve as you drift towards sleep. Imagine a woman mending a tear in a parka while her child snores beside her, each stitch binding warmth and care together. Tools here are not cold instruments. They are woven into family life, into nightly routine, into the very rhythm of dreams. And there is symbolism as well. To keep a blade by your side at night is to accept that danger is never far, but it is also to affirm readiness. To hold a needle in your pouch as you sleep is to affirm continuity, that tomorrow you will wake, mend, and carry on. The presence of tools beside bedding is both pragmatic and philosophical, a statement that life persists not just in warmth but in action. You picture how this would feel at dawn. Rising slowly, you would already have what you needed within reach: a knife to cut wood, a needle to patch hides, a bow for the day's hunt. No frantic searching, no wasted motion, everything woven into the same small space that cradled you through the night. It is efficiency born not of minimalism but of necessity. And as you settle again under the furs, you realize that even in rest, survival never loosens its grip. The tools at your side are silent companions, waiting with you, dreaming with you, ready to leap into use when dawn demands. The lodge is not cluttered, it is prepared. In this world, sleep itself is never separate from survival. The tools rest close, but not every object beside the bedding speaks only of survival. Some whispers are softer, warmer. As the fire grows stronger and morning edges nearer, you notice two figures curled together beneath a shared cloak. Their faces nearly touch, their laughter muffled under furs so the children will not stir. Even in a world of ice and hunger, love sneaks into the lodge, bringing with it a different kind of heat. Historians remind us that intimacy in winter life was not absent but essential. Couples shared not only duties and food but the very warmth of their bodies. A shared cloak, a layered parka spread over two forms, became both blanket and bond. Within the tight quarters of the lodge, affection was no private luxury. It was woven into the rhythm of survival. Companionship soothed, steadied, and sometimes distracted from the cold pressing in at the seams. And here's a quirky tidbit passed down through some oral traditions. Lovers whispered jokes or stories at night, stifling their giggles so as not to wake the whole household. Children might roll their eyes, muttering about parents who talk too much. It became a game of sorts, the adults pretending secrecy while everyone knew perfectly well what was happening beneath the shared fur. You can almost hear a muffled chuckle, a playful shove, the sound of warmth turning into laughter even while snow shrieks outside. Still, scholars debate the boundaries of intimacy in such communal spaces. Were couples careful to hide affection, or was it accepted as natural in the closeness of winter lodges? Some ethnographers argue that modesty prevailed, while others insist that privacy was a foreign concept imposed later by outsiders. The truth likely varied, shifting from family to family, night to night. In any case, warmth was shared, and love was no less a tool of endurance than firewood or fur. You let yourself imagine lying beneath that shared cloak. The smell of smoke lingers in the fabric, but beneath it is another scent, flesh warmed by nearness, hair carrying traces of cedar or sweetgrass. A hand brushes yours in the dark, a squeeze of reassurance. Whispers murmur close enough that you feel breath against your skin. The cold still presses at the edges, but here at the core, another fire glows, one of affection, of human connection deeper than necessity. It's easy to think of winter nights as grim, but here you see their tenderness. Couples exchanged promises in the dark, shared warmth when furs ran thin, and created spaces of laughter even when hunger gnawed. This wasn't only about reproduction, though that too mattered for the survival of a people. It was about comfort, companionship, and the emotional fuel to endure. A community that could laugh and love together at night was a community that woke stronger in the morning. There's symbolism here as well. Just as the fire needed constant tending, so too did relationships. Affection was another ember, coaxed alive with whispers, protected with shared cloaks. The warmth of the lodge was layered. Hides and furs, fire and stone, bodies and laughter. Each layer mattered. Each added its own kind of insulation against despair. Your senses linger in the moment. The sound of soft laughter melts into the crackle of logs. The touch of another hand is as reassuring as the weight of the quilts. Even the silence that follows carries meaning, the silence of companionship, of not being alone. In a world so hostile, this closeness feels revolutionary. And as your eyes grow heavy once more, you realize that love here is not frivolous. It is survival in its gentlest form. It warms the body, yes, but also the heart. It offers strength to face hunger, storms, and endless nights. Beneath shared cloaks, with whispered words and secret smiles, people endured not just because they had to, but because they wanted to for each other. The laughter softens, drifting back into the steady rhythm of sleep, and for a while the lodge is only breathing and firelight. Yet behind the comfort lurks the knowledge that winters could grow harsher than memory could recall. Entire generations endured seasons that seemed determined to test the limits of human endurance. You shift in your bedding, picturing what it must have felt like when storms didn't relent for days, when drifts swallowed the lodges whole, when the air itself seemed colder than bone. Historians point often to the 17th and 18th centuries, when North America shivered under what we now call the Little Ice Age. During these decades, winters deepened, and the cold bit harder. For native communities, already skilled at adaptation, this meant doubling efforts. More hides sewn, more fires tended, more food dried and rationed. Families told stories of winters so fierce that rivers froze solid to the bed, and bison wandered farther south than anyone remembered. To survive such years was not just impressive, it was extraordinary. There's a quirky little tidbit passed down through oral memory. In some communities, children were told that the frost itself was alive, a mischievous being who pressed its icy fingers against the lodge to test for weakness. Elders scolded children who left the entrance flap open, warning them that Frostman would slip in and nip their toes. What might sound like superstition doubled as practical teaching: close the flap, guard the warmth, or you'll invite in the cold itself. You can imagine a child squealing as an elder tapped their bare foot, laughing that Frostman had found them. But scholars still debate how devastating the Little Ice Age truly was for native populations. Did it worsen mortality dramatically, or did traditional knowledge buffer communities against the worst? Some argue that the records of famine suggest widespread suffering, while others insist that oral histories reveal resilience, with cultural adaptations strong enough to blunt even the sharpest winters. The question lingers unresolved, echoing like the howl of a storm that never quite fades. You lean into the sensory details of such a harsh season. The air inside the lodge feels colder despite the fire, breath misting even close to the flames. The hides stiffen with frost at night, crackling faintly when touched. Smoke clings more heavily to clothing because fires must be kept larger and longer. Food stores shrink faster, forcing families to chew tougher dried meat, to stretch meals with thin broths, to endure gnawing hunger with clenched jaws. Sleep becomes lighter, interrupted by shivers and the creak of hides under snow's heavy weight. And yet even in such winters, life endured. Families pulled their furs tighter, pressed closer, and waited. The community itself was insulation. You imagine elders telling stories not just for comfort, but to remind the young that storms had been survived before, and would be survived again. Memory was its own fire, warming spirits against despair. You notice too how the outside world pressed inward. Horses grew leaner, dogs foraged desperately, and hunts became more dangerous. Snow deeper than a man's height buried trails and river crossings. Yet still the lodges stood, their hides dark against the white, smoke rising like defiance into the frozen air. Each family inside represented a refusal, a whispered vow. We will outlast this night. We will outlast this winter. The symbolism grows clearer the longer you linger in thought. The Little Ice Age becomes not just a climate episode but a crucible, shaping resilience and ingenuity. Each generation carried forward not only stories of suffering but also the tricks that worked, banking snow against the lodge, sewing hides tighter, rationing smarter. Hardship became heritage, survival became tradition. Your senses lean into the lesson. You hear the howl of a storm that rattles poles like bones. You feel the cold biting even through layered furs. You taste thin broth, smoke thick, stretching scraps into meals. And yet you also sense the warmth of family pressed close. Laughter forcing its way even through hunger. Stories refusing to let despair take root. And as you settle back, eyelids heavy again, you realize that the miracle is not merely that people survived the worst winters history threw at them. The miracle is that they survived with memory, humor, affection, and identity intact. The lodge became not just a shield against cold, but a vessel carrying culture through the frost. In this way, each frozen season was not the end, but another layer of resilience added to the story. And you feel that story curl around you like another quilt, whispering that no matter how bitter the storm, warmth can always be found if hearts hold close enough together. The memory of harsher winters lingers, but as the fire burns steady, your mind drifts to another thought. Not every winter shelter looked the same. The tipi of the plains, sharp and conical, is only one face of survival. Move eastward into the forests, and you would find wigwams, domed shelters woven from saplings and bark. Shift farther north, and snow lodges or semi-subterranean homes come into view. Each design met the cold in its own way, and each told a different story about how native peoples adapted to winter's relentless grip. Historians often stress these contrasts. On the plains, tipis made of buffalo hides were light, portable, built to move with the herds. In the forests of the northeast, wigwams offered sturdier insulation, their rounded shapes trapping warmth more efficiently, layered with bark and mats of reeds. Along the icy rivers of the far north, partially dug-out lodges harness the earth itself as insulation, keeping families warmer beneath thick sod or snow-packed walls. Geography shaped architecture, and architecture shaped survival. Here's a quirky tidbit that might make you smile. Some explorers visiting the wigwams of the Algonquin peoples remarked that they were so warm and close that one sweats even when the snow lies thick outside. One observer even claimed he had to step back out into the storm to cool off. Imagine that, complaining of heat in the middle of a blizzard, your breath steaming as you gasp for relief in weather others could barely endure. It's a reminder that comfort is relative, and that native builders were masters at turning what they had into more than enough. But scholars continue to argue about which designs were most effective. Did the portability of typis trade off too much warmth compared to the sturdier wigwams? Were semi-subterranean lodges superior in efficiency but inferior in mobility? Some anthropologists argue that environmental conditions dictated everything. No single design was best, but rather each was perfectly tuned to its context. Others still suggest that cultural traditions, not just practicality, played a heavy role in why a people chose one form over another. You imagine now walking through such variety. Step into a wigwam, and you feel the rounded ceiling pressing the air downward, holding heat close. Bark panels creak faintly under snow's weight, but the interior glows with steady warmth as smoke seeps through a hole above. Step back outside and into a tipi, where the taller, angled walls pull smoke upward more easily, making the space airy but still protective. Then picture yourself descending into a semi-subterranean lodge where earthen walls block the wind entirely, leaving you in a hushed warmth that feels almost buried, like sleeping inside the earth itself. Your senses drift deeper. The wigwam smells of cedar bark and damp earth, its mats woven with reeds still faintly sweet. The tipi carries the musk of hides, smoke curling steadily from its peak. The semi-subterranean lodge is quieter still, its air heavy and still, the faint tang of soil mingling with fire's resin. Each shelter gives its own kind of cocoon, its own way of saying, "Here you are safe for the night." And yet, the symbolism runs through them all. Whether domed, peaked, or buried, each structure shows how humans read their environment like a book. Trees became bark and frames, buffalo became hides, earth itself became wall. Winter was not conquered by one invention, but by many, each a reflection of place, tradition, and ingenuity. The lodges are not just shelters, they are philosophies in wood, hide, and snow. You picture families moving between these worlds, trading, visiting, sometimes adopting one another's practices. Perhaps a plains traveler marveled at the sweaty warmth of a wigwam. Perhaps a woodland visitor stared upward at the elegance of a towering teepee. These contrasts weren't rigid divisions but conversations in architecture, whispered across the land in the language of survival. And so you lie back again in your imagined lodge, warmed by hides, but with your mind wandering into domes and dugouts and earthen walls. Each design different, yet all answering the same unyielding question: how do you sleep through a night so cold it could end you? The answer, you realize, is as varied as the land itself, but always rooted in the same unbreakable will to endure. The fire burns brighter now, smoke winding lazily upward, and as you sink deeper into thought, you remember how these lodges must have seemed to outsiders, the first Europeans stumbling into villages midwinter, expecting misery, and instead finding warmth. Their writings often reveal shock, even disbelief, that people living without stone houses or chimneys could endure blizzards in comfort. To those unaccustomed to such structures, the interiors seemed impossibly efficient, almost magical. Historians point out that journals from 17th and 18th century explorers and missionaries are sprinkled with astonishment. Men who arrived wrapped in wool cloaks often entered tipis or wigwams trembling with cold, only to discover interiors far warmer than their own crude cabins. Some confessed that native lodges outperformed European shelters of the same era. Smoke vented better, warmth gathered more efficiently, and the spaces felt more alive. You can almost picture an officer stamping snow from his boots, muttering that his own men froze nightly in drafty forts while these savages, as he dismissively called them, slept snug. And here comes a quirky tidbit. One French missionary complained that his hosts insisted he remove layer after layer of his European wool because he was sweating like a hog inside the lodge. He noted that the family laughed at him, amused that the stranger couldn't tolerate comfort. The irony drips from the page, an outsider brought to shame not by cold, but by too much heat in a place he assumed unlivable. Still, scholars argue about how reliable these accounts are. Were Europeans exaggerating, eager to romanticize the noble savage, or were they underplaying discomfort to highlight their own toughness? Some historians suggest these reports are colored by cultural bias, while others see them as honest amazement. The truth is tangled, as it often is when cultures meet, part admiration, part misunderstanding, part condescension. You let yourself picture the moment more vividly. A traveler stumbles inside, face raw from wind, cloak crusted with snow. He blinks in the smoky glow, wiping tears from stung eyes. Around him, families sit calmly, children drowsy in furs, dogs snoring softly. The contrast is staggering. His body aches from exposure, while theirs rests in steady warmth. He tries not to shiver, tries to keep dignity, but the relief floods his bones so quickly he nearly weeps. What must it have felt like to realize that survival here was not a miracle, but a mastery? The sensory differences leap at you. Outside, snow blinding, wind clawing, every breath like glass. Inside, fire crackling, hides muffling sound, warmth pressing into skin. The smell of resin, meat, leather dense, earthy, alive, contrasting with the sterile chill of the wilderness beyond. For an outsider accustomed to stone walls that leaked drafts, this lodge would have felt like another world. It's worth reflecting on the symbolism too. To step into a native lodge as an outsider was to step into a philosophy alien to European eyes. Here, warmth didn't come from massive masonry or iron stoves, but from balance hide, wood, snow, and bodies woven together. The efficiency was born not from wealth or technology, but from intimate knowledge of place. To Europeans, who valued permanence and grandeur, such flexible, portable, deceptively simple shelters seemed uncanny. They underestimated, until frost reminded them of their own frailty. And there's another layer, the quiet humiliation of discovery. Many Europeans prided themselves on civilized superiority, yet they found themselves learning to survive from those they dismissed. Some borrowed techniques, insulating with furs, banking snow, tending fires in shifts. Others resisted, insisting their own methods were better, even as their men froze. The contrast between stubborn pride and quiet adaptation must have played out many times beneath the howling winds. You can imagine the conversations that followed. Around a smoky fire, a missionary writes in his journal about the indolence of people who lounge in warmth, forgetting that his own face still burns from frostbite. A soldier sketches a tipi in his notebook, convinced it's unworthy compared to a wooden cabin, even as his toes thaw gratefully. These contradictions fill the accounts, revealing as much about outsiders' biases as about native life. Yet through all the words, one fact rings clear. People here knew how to turn the harshest environment into a home. Outsiders might misinterpret, might argue, might even ridicule, but they could not deny the truth of what they felt when they stepped inside. Warmth, safety, survival. Your senses settle again into that warmth. You hear the crackle of wood, the laughter of children amused by the foreign guest's discomfort, the soft rustle of hides as a woman adjusts a seam. The storm outside fades to a dull whisper. For a moment, you feel both perspectives, the awe of the outsider and the calm mastery of those who call this lodge home. And as you sink deeper into your bedding, you realize that survival here was not just a matter of enduring the cold. It was a matter of turning necessity into comfort, of making the impossible feel ordinary. What outsiders saw as marvel, the people inside saw simply as life. And that quiet distinction is perhaps the most powerful lesson of all. The outsider's astonishment lingers in your thoughts, but soon your mind shifts toward the lingering puzzles of these lodges themselves. You've spent the night surrounded by hides, fire, and breath, imagining how warmth might have endured. Yet not every detail is certain. Even now, scholars debate how effective these shelters truly were. Did they keep families cozy through the worst storms? Or were they drafty, smoky compromises that required constant adjustment? The evidence remains as hazy as the smoke curling above the fire. Historians present one picture: buffalo, hide tipis, carefully sewn and angled, could trap surprising warmth. Families clustered close, fire tended constantly, hides patched and doubled when needed. Oral traditions describe them as snug, efficient, almost perfected through centuries of practice. But then the archaeological record complicates matters. Postholes and charred earth reveal fires, yes, but not always clear traces of how thick coverings were, or whether smoke holes vented efficiently. Skeptical voices suggest these lodges may not have been as comfortable as memory insists. And then comes a quirky tidbit, lodged in old missionary reports. Some outsiders noted that when lodges filled with too many people, condensation dripped from the ceiling, making bedding damp. One priest wrote that he woke to find icicles hanging from the inner poles. Was he exaggerating for drama, or was it truth? Families themselves likely managed such nuisances with skill-adjusting flaps, shifting bedding, drying hides by the fire. But the image of waking beneath indoor icicles is vivid enough to stick in the mind. The debates persist. Some anthropologists argue that hides lose efficiency as they age, stiffening and cracking, allowing drafts to creep in. Others counter that constant maintenance kept lodges surprisingly draft-proof, with women tightening seams and adding fresh skins as needed. Still others point to the role of communal body heat, suggesting that warmth relied more on numbers than on architecture. Was the lodge itself warm, or was it the people inside who created the climate? The line between shelter and society blurs, leaving scholars chasing an answer they may never fully pin down. You let yourself sink into the problem, as if it were a mystery to solve. Imagine yourself measuring warmth at different spots close to the fire, at the walls, beneath the bedding. Near the fire, heat prickles your skin. A few steps away, your breath fogs. By the walls, drafts lick your shoulders. Yet beneath the furs at the lodge's heart, warmth collects thick as honey. Perhaps the truth is layered like this. Not uniformly cozy, not wholly drafty, but a shifting balance where comfort depended on placement, maintenance, and vigilance. Your senses heighten as you picture it. The fire's glow warms your cheeks, while your back chills faintly with each gust against the hide. You pull the furs tighter, pressing into the body beside you, and instantly the balance tips again, warmth flows back, drafts forgotten. It becomes clear that effectiveness cannot be judged in isolation. It wasn't just hides or fire or quilts. It was all of it together, plus the closeness of bodies and the watchful hands adjusting seams. A living system, not a static structure. And this, perhaps, is the heart of the scholarly puzzle. Modern people want precise measurements, statistics of temperature and insulation. But survival here wasn't mathematical, it was experiential. What mattered wasn't whether the lodge hit 60 degrees or 30. What mattered was whether the family inside woke alive, with enough warmth to move, enough strength to carry on. Comfort, by our standards, was irrelevant. Endurance was the only metric that mattered. There is symbolism in this debate as well. The uncertainty mirrors the fragility of memory itself. What one generation recalls as warmth, another recalls as hardship. The truth may lie in between, like the flickering light of a fire that seems bright until a draft makes it sputter. Scholars argue, but the people who lived these winters knew the answer firsthand. It was never perfect, but it was enough. You think again of those outsiders shivering in their wool, astonished at the snugness of a lodge. You think of missionaries grumbling about smoke and dampness. Both are true, in their way. The lodges were marvels, and they were imperfect. They were warm havens, and they were smoky caves. They were both salvation and struggle, just as all shelters are when the world outside is trying to kill you. Your senses absorb this paradox. The fire warms your palms, yet your toes ache with cold. The hides block the wind, yet smoke stings your eyes. The bedding cradles you in softness, yet hunger gnaws at your belly. Each element is both gift and challenge. The lodge is not flawless, but it is functional. And in that functionality lies its true genius. Not comfort, but survival. As you curl tighter beneath your furs, you realize that the scholarly debates don't need neat resolution. The arguments themselves reflect the complexity of winter life. Was it warm? Sometimes. Was it cold? Also, yes. Did it work? The proof lies in the generations who endured, who dreamed, who whispered stories by firelight, who woke each morning to frost on the walls but life in their lungs. And that, you think as your eyes close again, is the only verdict that matters. These shelters may leave scholars puzzled, but they left families alive, and in the long winter nights of history, that was triumph enough. The arguments of scholars dissolve as the night reaches its final hours. The fire, though low, glows with a steady heart, embers pulsing like veins of molten earth. Around you, bodies are still breathing, sighing, cocooned in fur. Dogs twitch in dreams. A child murmurs faintly, soothed by a mother's hand even in her sleep. The storm outside has softened to a hush, as if the world itself has surrendered for a moment. You realize you are listening not only to a single night, but to centuries of nights lived and endured in just this way. Historians tell us that generations were raised inside these fragile circles of warmth. Infants were swaddled, children grew, elders told stories, couples whispered, warriors rose for patrols all within hides and poles, smoke and snow. The lodge was not simply a shelter, it was a continuity, a vessel that carried culture through winters that might otherwise have erased it. In every flicker of flame, in every seam sewn tight against the wind, survival became tradition. And here's a quirky tidbit that lingers sweetly. Some families believed the last ember of a fire held a spirit that must never die. At dawn, someone would scoop it carefully into a pot or bundle of bark, carrying it to relight the day's flames. To let it extinguish completely was to risk misfortune. Imagine waking to see a grandmother bent over, whispering to a tiny coal as if coaxing a child, then feeding it twigs until it breathed back into flame. Fire wasn't just utility, it was kin. Still, scholars debate how permanent these winter lodges truly were. Were they dismantled and rebuilt each season, or maintained year-round in cycles of use? Some argue that mobility defined plains life, with lodges shifting constantly with herds. Others counter that winter villages were semi-stable, returned to year after year in familiar valleys or river bends. The archaeological traces, rings of post holes, charred layers of hearths hint at both. The uncertainty is fitting, for winter life was fluid, adapting to what each year demanded. You let your senses drink in this final scene. The fire's embers glow steady, red gold veins beneath black ash. The hides smell thick of smoke, leather, and the faint musk of fur. The warmth of bodies lingers, heavy and reassuring, pressing back against the brittle cold that waits just outside. In your imagination, you reach a hand toward the wall, feel the hides chill, then pull back to the cocoon of blankets. You breathe, and the air is dense with survival itself. There is symbolism in these lingering embers. They are the last defense of the night, but also the promise of dawn. They connect yesterday's fire to today's, yesterday's life to tomorrow's. In them, you see the persistence of culture, the refusal to let warmth slip away no matter how long the winter. They glow like memory, like heritage, like defiance itself. Your thoughts stretch wider. These people endured not because their lodges were perfect, but because they were adaptive. They turned snow into insulation, fire into kin, hides into walls, stones into silent radiators. They wove practicality with spirit, folding dreams and duties together until they became inseparable. What looks to modern eyes like hardship was also ingenuity, and what appears fragile was in truth resilient. You close your eyes again, listening to the last murmur of logs shifting in the hearth. The lodge hums like a great, breathing body. Its walls, the ribs, its fire, the heart, its people, the lifeblood. Outside, the storm waits for another chance. Inside, warmth holds on, quiet but unbroken. And so the night passes, as it has passed for countless generations, carrying life forward through cold that should have ended it. And now, as the story draws to its close, the pace begins to soften. You've walked through long nights on the plains. You've curled beneath hides and furs. You've felt the bite of frost and the relief of firelight. You've shared in the rhythms of patrols, the whispers of lovers, the laughter of children, the dreams of shamans. You've listened to the lodge itself breathe, walls trembling with wind, embers glowing like quiet stars. Let your body relax into that imagery one final time. Picture yourself lying back inside a circle of warmth, the cold kept outside by nothing more than hides, fire, and closeness. Hear the muffled sigh of the storm beyond, reduced to nothing more than a lullaby. Smell the faint traces of wood smoke, leather, and snow melting into droplets on the hides. Feel the heavy quilt of fur pressing over you, the weight of centuries of survival curling around your shoulders. Notice how each detail, once a matter of life or death, now lulls you toward rest. The fire's glow softens your eyelids. The steady breathing of those beside you steadies your own. Even the distant memory of hunger or frost has been transformed into reassurance. The knowledge that people found ways to endure, that warmth always returned. So let the last embers guide you. Imagine them glowing brighter, then dimming slowly, until they become a single point of light in the dark. With each breath, they fade gently, until nothing is left but calm. You are safe. You are warm. The storm outside cannot touch you here. Drift now into your own dreams, carrying with you the quiet strength of those who once lay in winter lodges, who kept the fire alive through the longest nights. Sweet dreams.